What you're about to hear isn't a theory. It isn't speculation, dramatized for effect, or stitched together from anonymous tips. It's the true, fully resolved story of a man who spent 3 decades hiding in plain sight, a licensed architect who designed buildings for a living, and, according to his own confession, designed murder as a side occupation. And here's the part almost nobody fully absorbed when the news broke. The truth wasn't discovered through some brilliant cinematic breakthrough. It was sitting in evidence rooms for over a decade, untouched, unconnected, waiting.
So let's ask the question that should unsettle you right now.
How does a man live 2 completely separate lives? A wife, 2 kids, a mortgage, a corner office in Manhattan, while allegedly disposing of bodies less than a few miles from his own home. Stay with this, because the real shock isn't the crime scene. It's what came before it, and what came after, and just how long it took anyone to notice. Let's go back, not to 2010, when the world first heard the name Gilgo Beach. Further back to 1993. That year, on a stretch of remote coastline in the Hamptons, hunters stumbled across human remains. No name, no suspect, no urgency really, because a body without a name is in the eyes of an overwhelmed system, just a case file that gathers dust. That woman would eventually be identified as Sandra Costilla. For over 3 decades, she was a statistic, a footnote. Nobody knew yet that she was victim number 1 in a killing spree that would stretch across 17 years. Fast forward, December 2010. A K-9 unit is training along Ocean Parkway, a thin, windswept road that hugs Gilgo Beach on Long Island's South Shore. The dog alerts, police start digging, and what they find isn't 1 body, it's 4, wrapped in burlap, bound, deliberately placed close together, almost like a signature. The press starts calling them the Gilgo 4. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. All of them were young women. All of them, at the time they vanished, were working as escorts, advertising on sites like Craigslist. All of them made a phone call, or sent a message, or got in a car, and simply never came home. Here's where the story gets darker, not lighter, because that search for 4 bodies didn't stop at 4. Over the following months, the search area kept expanding, and the remains kept surfacing. 10, then 11. Some of the victims were men, some were children, a toddler, unidentified for years. Some had died decades earlier and had nothing obviously connecting them to the others. Investigators quickly realized they weren't looking at one crime. They were looking at a dumping ground, possibly the work of one person, possibly several. Nobody could say for sure. And for over a decade, think about that number, 10+ years, nobody could say for sure who did it. Now here's a name you need to remember, because it's the hinge this entire story swings on. Rex Heuermann. On paper, Heuermann was almost aggressively unremarkable. 60-year-old architect, married, 2 kids, a daughter and a stepson. He ran a small consulting firm out of a Manhattan office on 5th Avenue, walking distance from the Empire State Building. He lived 45 minutes from Gilgo Beach, in a modest, cluttered house in Massapequa Park, the kind of house neighbors describe, almost apologetically, as the one with too much stuff piled up outside. Nothing about him screamed danger. That's not incidental to this story. That is the story. But this is just the beginning. Because while Heuermann was designing office buildings by day, investigators would eventually allege he was doing something else by night, something methodical, something that suggests planning, not impulse. And the way he was finally caught? It wasn't blood. It wasn't a confession. It was a pizza crust. Let's slow down here, because this next part is the kind of detail documentaries live for. And it's completely true. For years, investigators had one thin thread, a burner phone used to contact several of the victims around the time they disappeared. That phone had ties to a Chevrolet Avalanche, a distinctive boxy pickup truck that a witness recalled seeing near one of the victims' homes. Cell tower data placed that phone, and by extension the truck, moving between Manhattan and Massapequa Park, over and over, on a predictable schedule. Someone with a 9-to-5 job, someone commuting, Investigators quietly built a list of men who fit that pattern, who owned a similar truck, who lived in the area, who commuted into the city. Heuermann's name surfaced, and once his name was on the list, something chilling emerged. DNA. Hair recovered from some of the victims' remains was tested using advanced forensic genealogy, the same kind of technique that's cracked cold cases across the country in recent years. Investigators say it pointed toward the Heuermann family line, so how do you confirm it? You can't just walk up and ask a suspect for his DNA. So, according to law enforcement accounts, undercover officers followed Heuermann and waited. And when he finished eating a slice of pizza outside his Manhattan office and tossed the crust in a public trash can, they retrieved it. That discarded pizza crust, prosecutors say, gave them the DNA match they needed. Ask yourself something for a second. An architect, a man trained to think in blueprints, in structural precision, in load-bearing calculations, allegedly outsmarted investigators for 17 years. And in the end, what caught him wasn't a mistake in his plan. It was a piece of trash he didn't think twice about. In July 2023, police arrested Rex Heuermann outside that same Fifth Avenue office. The headlines exploded overnight. Long Island serial killer suspect finally caught. But here's the twist almost nobody expected. That arrest wasn't the end of the story. It was barely the middle, because when investigators searched Heuermann's home, they didn't just find circumstantial evidence. According to court filings, they allegedly found a hidden room in his basement, a cache of weapons, thousands of images of extreme violent pornography, documents referencing missing women, and this is the detail that made even hardened detectives pause, spreadsheets, allegedly used to track victims, dates and disposal locations, like a project manager tracking deliverables. If true, it reframes the entire case. This wasn't rage, this wasn't chaos. This was, according to prosecutors, an operation run with the same cold precision he brought to his day job designing buildings. Now let's talk about the human cost here, because it's easy to get swept up in the mechanics of a case like this and forget there were real women at the center of it. Real families who spent years, some of them over a decade, not knowing what happened to their daughters, their sisters, their mothers. Take Amber Lynn Costello. She was 27 years old when she vanished in September 2010. Her roommate later told investigators that on the night she disappeared, Amber left to meet a client, saying she'd be back in an hour. She never returned. For over a decade, her family lived in that unbearable space between grief and hope, not able to bury her properly, not able to stop wondering, every single day, if today would be the day someone called with an answer. Or consider Melissa Barthelemy, just 24 when she disappeared in 2009. In the weeks after she vanished, her younger sister started receiving disturbing, taunting phone calls, someone using Melissa's phone, someone who seemed to be toying with a grieving teenager. For years, that phone call was one of the only leads investigators had. It would eventually help build the timeline that led straight to Heuermann's front door. These aren't just names in a case file. They're daughters who someone tucked in as children. They're sisters who someone waited for at bus stops. And for years, the systems meant to protect them didn't. Several of the victims' families and advocates have pointed to something uncomfortable but important. Because many of the victims were sex workers, some early tips and reports weren't pursued with the urgency they deserved. If that's true, and multiple investigative reports suggest it is, then part of this story isn't just about one man's alleged crimes. It's about how a society can quietly decide which missing women matter and which ones get filed away. Sit with that for a second. If you were a detective in 2007, working an overloaded caseload, and a call came in about a missing escort, would your instinct have been urgency or assumption? That question isn't rhetorical. It's the reason this case took as long as it did to crack. Now, back to the man at the center of it, because there's a detail here that most people skip past, and it might be the most disturbing thread in the entire story. Heuermann's family didn't just live near a crime scene. According to his own family's later statements, they lived with him. His wife, Asa Ellerup, was reportedly out of the country visiting family during a window when several of the disappearances allegedly occurred. His daughter later told reporters she believed he most likely did it, a devastating, almost unthinkable sentence for a child to say about her own father. Meanwhile, his wife spent years defending him publicly, even after the arrest, insisting the man she knew for decades couldn't be capable of this. Two people, same house, same husband and father, two completely different conclusions. What does that tell you about how well any of us can really know the people closest to us? Let's fast forward through the legal battle, because it's worth understanding just how long Heuermann fought this. For nearly 3 years after his arrest, he pleaded not guilty. His defense team challenged the DNA evidence at the core of the prosecution's case, arguing it wasn't reliable enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In September 2025, the judge overseeing the case ruled that the DNA evidence would be admissible at trial, a major blow to the defense. His trial was set to begin in September 2026, expected to be one of the most closely watched criminal trials in recent American history. And then, just months before that trial was set to start, everything changed. Here's the twist nobody saw coming, even after years of buildup. Rex Heuermann didn't go to trial at all. In April 2026, in a Suffolk County courtroom, Heuermann stood in a dark suit, hands shackled, and changed his plea. Guilty. Not to 1 murder, not to 3. He pleaded guilty to 7 counts of murder. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello, Jessica Taylor, Valerie Mack, and Sandra Costilla, the very woman whose remains had been found back in 1993, decades before anyone knew her name belonged to a pattern. And in a final, gutting admission, he also acknowledged responsibility for an 8th killing, Karen Vergata, bringing his confirmed body count to 8 women, murdered over roughly 17 years. When the judge asked him directly whether he believed it was in his best interest to plead guilty rather than face trial, Heuermann answered with 2 words: "Yes, Your Honor." No elaboration, no apology, at least not one that made headlines. Just a quiet, almost bureaucratic confirmation, the same flat tone, family members would later say, that he used to answer any question in the decades they knew him. Under the plea agreement, Heuermann accepted 3 consecutive life sentences, followed by 4 additional consecutive sentences of 25 years to life. In practical terms, it means exactly what it sounds like. He will never leave prison. In exchange, prosecutors agreed not to pursue additional charges tied to those 8 victims, but required something else in return: ongoing cooperation with the FBI. Because here's the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. Even after pleading guilty to 8 murders, investigators still don't believe the case is fully closed. Several other sets of remains found in the Gilgo Beach area over the years remain unconnected to any confirmed killer. The list of the dead is longer than the list of the confessed. 2 months later, in June 2026, Heuermann stood in that same courtroom one final time, this time for sentencing. And this is where the human weight of the entire case landed, all at once. Victims' families were finally given the moment they had waited years, in some cases decades, for: the chance to speak directly to the man responsible. Family members delivered searing, emotional statements, describing years of unanswered questions, birthdays and holidays spent grieving without closure, lives permanently reshaped by a stretch of coastal parkway that most people drive past without a second thought. Judge Timothy Mazzei formally sentenced Heuermann to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So let's return to the question we opened with. How does someone live 2 lives at once? Devoted father, licensed professional, faithful commuter, while allegedly, and now confessedly, committing atrocities in the margins of that ordinary schedule. The unsatisfying, uncomfortable answer is this: he simply did, for 17 years, undetected, not because he was a criminal mastermind in some superhuman sense, but because the systems meant to catch him were slow, underfunded, and for a long stretch of time, unwilling to prioritize the missing women he targeted. If you were a detective working this case in 2007, or 2010, or even 2020, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently? Would you have pushed harder on that first burner phone lead? Would you have taken that first disturbing phone call to Melissa's sister more seriously? It's easy to ask these questions with the benefit of hindsight. It's much harder to imagine how many other cases right now are sitting in the same kind of limbo Sandra Castilla's case sat in for over 25 years. A name without an answer, a family without closure. Because here's the final, uncomfortable truth this story leaves behind. Rex Heuermann is behind bars for the rest of his life. That part is resolved. But the Gilgo Beach cases as a whole are not entirely closed. Investigators have said publicly that some of the remains found in that stretch of coastline still have no confirmed killer attached to them at all. Which means somewhere, right now, there may be another name, another ordinary-looking commuter, another unremarkable neighbor that nobody has connected to anything yet. And that's the sentence this story really leaves you with. Not the case is closed, but how many more Rex Heuermanns are currently living lives so ordinary, so forgettable, that no algorithm, no detective, no pattern has caught up to them yet? That's not a comfortable thought to end on, but it's the true one.